The cold metal of handcuffs dug painfully into Marcus Cole's wrists as he was slammed against the wall of the interrogation room at New York's 28th Precinct. His shoulder throbbed where the officer had wrenched his arm during the arrest. The clock on the wall read 4:37 a.m. Just 12 hours before what should have been the defining moment of his career, his first major art exhibition at the prestigious Horizon Gallery. Name? The officer barked, not bothering to look up from his paperwork. Marcus Cole. I'm the artist featured at Horizon Gallery. I was just checking my installation before tomorrow's opening. Despite the fear coursing through him, Marcus fought to keep his voice steady. The officer looked up with a sneer. Yeah, right. And I'm dating Beyoncé. He slammed his hand on the table. Cut the crap. What were you really doing there? I'm telling you the truth. I have a key. The security system malfunctioned. Marcus winced as he shifted in the uncomfortable metal chair, the handcuffs cutting deeper. A key you stole, maybe? The officer circled the table, looming over him. People like you don't just have art exhibitions at places like Horizon. People like you. The words hung in the air, their meaning unmistakable. My curator is Imani Davis. Please, just call her. We'll get to that when we're good and ready. The officer leaned in close, his breath hot on Marcus's face. For now, you're not going anywhere. The door slammed shut, leaving Marcus alone with the harsh fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. His wrists were bleeding now, the handcuffs fastened too tight during the violent arrest. He'd been thrown to the ground outside the gallery, knee in his back, face pressed against the cold pavement while he tried to explain. They hadn't listened. Hadn't cared. Hours passed. Morning light filtered through the small, wire-reinforced window. Marcus watched as the precinct came alive with the shift change, officers streaming in with coffee cups and tired eyes. Some glanced at him with open contempt. Others simply looked through him as if he were invisible. His thoughts turned to his mother, Elaine, who would be preparing to attend his exhibition opening that evening. After years of pushing him toward more practical careers, she had finally embraced his artistic path. What would she think when he didn't answer her calls? When he wasn't standing proudly beside his paintings as guests arrived? The door crashed open. A detective entered, followed by a uniformed officer. Something had changed, the detective's body language, the strange look he gave Marcus. Mr. Cole, there seems to have been a situation. The detective cleared his throat, suddenly uncomfortable. You're free to go. Marcus stared in disbelief. Just like that? After how I was treated? Someone's here for you. The detective wouldn't meet his eyes. The handcuffs were finally removed, revealing angry red welts and dried blood where they had cut into his skin. Marcus rubbed his wrists as he was led through the precinct, past officers who suddenly couldn't meet his gaze. In the lobby stood a man who commanded attention without saying a word, tall, distinguished, in a suit that probably cost more than everything Marcus owned combined. The man's eyes locked with Marcus's, and something electric passed between them, a shock of recognition that made no sense. Marcus had never seen this person before, yet something about his eyes, the set of his jaw. Marcus. The man's deep voice carried across the room, silencing all other conversation. I'm Desmond Cole. The surname wasn't lost on Marcus. Cole. His own last name. I don't understand, Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm your father. 3 words that shattered 28 years of believing he had been abandoned, unwanted. 3 words that made no sense coming from a man who exuded wealth and power from every pore. Desmond stepped forward, his eyes taking in Marcus's disheveled appearance, the blood on his wrists, the bruise forming on his cheekbone where it had been pressed into the pavement. Something dangerous flashed in the older man's eyes. We have much to discuss, but perhaps not here. He gestured toward the door where a sleek black Bentley waited at the curb. Then he turned to the detective, his voice dropping to a glacial tone. And I will be discussing the treatment of my son with your superiors. Extensively. The detective paled visibly. Marcus stood frozen, his mind racing. The father his mother had described as a deadbeat who disappeared before he could walk was standing before him, not as the failure he'd imagined, but as someone powerful enough to walk into a police precinct and have charges dropped with a word. "How did you even know I was here?" Marcus finally asked, his voice hoarse from hours of unanswered pleas. "Facial recognition software in the precinct's booking system. I've had algorithms searching for you for years." Desmond's expression softened slightly. "I never stopped looking for you, Marcus. Have you ever wondered what it would be like to discover your entire life was built on secrets? Let me know in the comments if you've ever experienced a life-changing revelation that made you question everything you thought you knew about yourself or your family. Welcome to Courage Core Stories, where we explore true stories that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew. Today's story begins with a promising young artist brutally handcuffed and humiliated in a police precinct and ends with a revelation that would forever alter his understanding of his identity, his past, and his future. As Marcus stepped into that Bentley, blood still drying on his wrists, he couldn't have known that his life was about to change in ways far beyond the success or failure of his art exhibition. The man sitting beside him represented not just the father he never knew, but a past deliberately hidden from him, a fortune he never knew existed, and a family connection that would challenge everything he believed about himself and his origins. The exhibition at Horizon Gallery was scheduled to open in less than 12 hours. Paintings that captured the struggle and beauty of life in Harlem, created in a cramped studio apartment by a man who believed he came from nothing. Now, sitting beside a billionaire who shared his blood, Marcus wondered if those paintings, those expressions of his truth, were even valid anymore. "I know this is overwhelming," Desmond said as the car pulled away from the curb. "But I hope you'll give me a chance to explain." He reached into a compartment and pulled out a first aid kit, gently offering it to Marcus. "Let me see your wrists." Marcus hesitated before extending his hands. The gesture was so paternal, so natural, it made his chest ache with the weight of all he'd missed. "My mother told me you abandoned us," Marcus said, wincing as Desmond carefully cleaned the cuts left by the handcuffs. "That you left before I could walk." Desmond's hands paused momentarily. "That's not exactly what happened." "Then what did happen?" Marcus pulled his hands away, anger suddenly flaring. "Where have you been for 28 years while I grew up thinking I wasn't worth staying for?" The car stopped at a red light, and for a moment, the two men sat in silence, separated by decades of absence yet connected by unmistakable resemblance. The same strong jawline. The same intense eyes. The same artistic hands, though Desmond's were manicured and adorned with a single gold signet ring while Marcus's were stained with paint and now marked with the wounds of injustice. "I have so many questions," Marcus said finally, his voice breaking. "I have answers," Desmond replied. "Though you may not like all of them." As the light turned green and the Bentley moved forward, Marcus felt himself crossing a threshold. Behind him lay 28 years of believing one story about his origins. Ahead lay an unknown future and a truth he wasn't sure he was ready to hear. The precinct faded into the distance as they drove toward the rising sun. In 12 hours, Marcus's exhibition would open, a collection of paintings that told the story of who he thought he was. But now, sitting beside the father he never knew existed, his body still aching from the brutal arrest, Marcus wondered what story he would tell tomorrow, and all the tomorrows after that. What neither man could have predicted was how their unexpected reunion would ripple through both their lives, challenging not just their understanding of the past but their visions for the future. The truth, as Marcus would soon discover, was far more complex than either abandonment or absence. It was a web of choices, sacrifices, and secrets that had shaped both their lives in profound and irreversible ways. And it all began with a security system malfunction, a case of racial profiling disguised as law enforcement, and a facial recognition alert that finally connected a father and son who had been searching for each other in vastly different ways. The story of Marcus and Desmond Cole was about to unfold, revealing how the intersection of art, identity, race, and family can create a portrait more complex and compelling than anything that could be captured on canvas. Marcus Jenkins was born on a sweltering August day in 1985, in a cramped apartment on West 143rd Street in Harlem. His mother, Elaine, barely 20 herself, had held her newborn son with a mixture of love and terror. She had no idea how to raise a child alone in a neighborhood where gunshots often served as nighttime lullabies, but she swore to herself that her boy would have chances she never did. Their apartment was small, just one bedroom with peeling paint and temperamental plumbing, but Elaine kept it immaculate. She worked double shifts as a nurse's aide at Harlem Hospital, leaving Marcus with her mother, Beatrice, during the day. Grandma B, as Marcus called her, filled his early years with stories of the Harlem Renaissance, pointing out buildings where Langston Hughes and Duke Ellington once walked. "This neighborhood has magic in its bones," she would tell him. "You remember that when people try to tell you otherwise." By age 5, Marcus showed an uncanny ability to recreate what he saw. While other children scribbled stick figures, he drew detailed portraits of his grandmother that captured the gentle crinkles around her eyes. Elaine noticed but was too exhausted most evenings to pay much attention. She'd ruffle his hair, tape his drawings to the refrigerator, then collapse into bed, her uniform reeking of antiseptic and illness. The subject of Marcus's father remained shrouded in silence. When Marcus was 7, he asked directly during dinner, "Mama, where's my daddy?" The question hung in the air like a suspended grenade. Elaine's fork clattered against her plate. "He's not around, baby. Just eat your dinner." When he persisted, her voice hardened. "Marcus Jenkins, some questions don't need answering. Now finish those green beans." He learned quickly that this particular door remained firmly closed. At school, Father's Day projects were exercises in humiliation. While other children made construction paper ties and coffee mugs, Marcus sat alone, drawing elaborate cityscapes instead. His third-grade teacher, Ms. Diaz, recognized both his talent and his pain. She began supplying him with proper drawing paper and pencils, sometimes staying after school to show him techniques she remembered from her college art classes. "You have a gift," she told him one afternoon as he meticulously shaded a portrait of a homeless man he'd seen on their walk to the playground. "Don't let anyone tell you it's not important." Life shifted dramatically when Marcus was 9. Elaine met Richard Taylor, a postal worker with a steady income and a 2-bedroom apartment in a slightly better part of Harlem. Within 6 months, they were married, and Marcus found himself with a stepfather and a new home on Convent Avenue. Richard was not unkind, but he was practical to his core. A Vietnam veteran who'd clawed his way into middle-class stability, he viewed the world as a series of threats to be neutralized through preparation and hard work. Art, in Richard's worldview, was a luxury for people who didn't understand how precarious life could be. "Drawing's fine for a hobby," he told Marcus after discovering him sketching instead of completing his mathematics homework. "But it won't put food on the table. You need something solid to fall back on." Elaine, grateful for Richard's stability and the relief from crushing financial pressure, found herself caught between her son's obvious talent and her husband's pragmatism. She began to echo Richard's sentiments, though sometimes, when Richard worked late, she would sit quietly watching Marcus draw, a wistful expression on her face. "You know," she said once, "before I got pregnant with you, I wanted to be a singer. Used to sing in the church choir every Sunday." "Why'd you stop?" Marcus asked, not looking up from his sketchpad. "Life happens, baby. Sometimes dreams have to wait." The unspoken message was clear: dreams were luxuries they couldn't afford. By middle school, Marcus had developed a double life. At home, he was the dutiful student Richard wanted, bringing home solid B's in practical subjects. In secret, he filled sketchbooks with the world as he saw it, the dignity in his grandmother's aging face, the exhaustion in his mother's slumped shoulders after a 12-hour shift, the hard-won pride in Richard's military posture. His art teacher, Mr. Washington, became his first real mentor. A graduate of Howard University's art program, Washington recognized in Marcus not just talent but a unique perspective. You don't just see things, you see through them, he told Marcus after school one day. That's rare. When a citywide art competition was announced for 8th graders, Mr. Washington urged Marcus to enter. The grand prize was a summer scholarship to a prestigious youth program at the School of Visual Arts. Marcus wanted it desperately but knew Richard would disapprove of the time wasted on art. For weeks, Marcus worked on his submission in the school art room, a mixed-media piece depicting his neighborhood, not as the dangerous ghetto portrayed in news reports, but as he experienced it, vibrant, complex, struggling but alive with humanity and possibility. He titled it simply, Harlem. When his piece won first place, Marcus was ecstatic and terrified in equal measure. Mr. Washington called Elaine personally to share the news, emphasizing the opportunity this represented. To Marcus's surprise, his mother arrived at the award ceremony without Richard, her eyes bright with unshed tears as she stared at his artwork. "Your father could draw," she said quietly as they stood before his piece. It was the first time she'd ever voluntarily mentioned his biological father. "Not like this, but he had talent. That's part of why I fell for him." "What happened to him?" Marcus dared to ask. Elaine sighed. "He chose a different path. Drugs. The street. He wasn't strong enough to choose you instead." She squeezed his shoulder. "I'll talk to Richard about the summer program. This is important." The argument that night was explosive. Marcus sat on his bed, pillow pressed against his ears, as Richard's voice boomed through the thin walls. "Art. Art. The boy needs to focus on something real. You want him ending up like his real daddy? All talent and no sense." "This is different," Elaine countered. "This is a legitimate opportunity. The program is free, Richard." "Free? Do you know how rare that is? Nothing's free. They get these kids' hopes up, then what? A lifetime of struggle? Disappointment? I'm trying to protect him." "No, you're trying to control him. There's a difference." The silence that followed was worse than the shouting. Eventually, Elaine appeared in Marcus's doorway, her face tight with suppressed emotion. "You can do the program," she said. "But Richard wants you to take extra math tutoring too. That's the compromise." Marcus nodded, too relieved to argue about the conditions. That summer became the first time he was surrounded by other young artists, the first time his passion was treated as legitimate rather than frivolous. He soaked up techniques like a sponge, staying late every day, often missing dinner to perfect a technique or complete a project. By the time high school loomed, the tension in the household had crystallized around Marcus's future. Richard pushed for him to attend Bronx Science or Brooklyn Tech, specialized high schools that would put him on track for engineering or medicine. Marcus, emboldened by his summer experience, fought for LaGuardia High School of Music and Art and Performing Arts. The portfolio review process was grueling. Marcus spent months preparing, selecting pieces that showcased range and technical skill while revealing his distinct perspective. The night before his interview, he found his mother sitting at the kitchen table, an envelope in her hands. "I've been saving," she said, pushing it toward him. "It's not much, but it should cover supplies for your first year if you get in. Don't tell Richard." The gesture moved him more than any words could have. His mother, who counted pennies and worked overtime to make ends meet, had been secretly supporting his dream all along. When the acceptance letter came, Richard's reaction was subdued. "Fine," he said over dinner. "But you maintain at least AB average in your academic classes, or this art business gets put on hold. Education first." LaGuardia opened worlds Marcus hadn't known existed. For the first time, he wasn't the art kid everyone was. The diversity of talent was humbling and exhilarating. He found himself drawn to portraiture and social realism, his work increasingly focused on capturing the dignity of ordinary people in extraordinary circumstances. His junior-year art teacher, Ms. Abramson, pulled him aside after he submitted a series of portraits of subway riders. "You have a rare gift for empathy," she told him. Your work doesn't just show people, it honors them. You should be thinking about college-level training. The word college triggered a familiar dread. Art school was expensive, and despite Richard's steady income, their family had little saved. The idea seemed impossible until Ms. Abramson mentioned scholarship opportunities at several prestigious programs, including Cooper Union, which offered full tuition scholarships to all admitted students. For the next year, Marcus lived a divided life. At school, he poured everything into building a portfolio worthy of Cooper Union. At home, he maintained the academic performance Richard demanded while avoiding discussions of his future plans. The strain showed in sleepless nights and skipped meals, but the possibility of pursuing his art without burdening his family financially drove him forward. The day his Cooper Union acceptance arrived was the culmination of years of secret hope and visible struggle. When he showed the letter to his mother, she wept openly, pulling him into a fierce embrace. "Your real father would be proud," she whispered. "I am so proud." Richard's reaction was more complex, a mixture of grudging respect and lingering doubt. "It's a good school," he admitted. "And the scholarship helps. But the art world is brutal, Marcus. I just don't want to see you broken by it." For the first time, Marcus recognized the fear beneath Richard's pragmatism, not disdain for his dreams, but terror that those dreams would lead to disappointment. In his own way, his stepfather had been trying to protect him from a world that rarely rewarded raw talent without connections or privilege. "I know it won't be easy," Marcus told him. "But I have to try." As he prepared to leave Harlem for the East Village campus, Marcus found himself drawing his family obsessively: Elaine's hands, worn from years of care work, Richard's precise posture, Grandma Bea's face, now deeply lined with age. He was capturing not just their likenesses but the complicated love that had shaped him, the practical concerns that had constrained him, and the stubborn hope that had sustained him. His Harlem childhood had given him both his subject matter and his purpose. Now he just had to prove that art could indeed be more than a luxury, it could be a necessity, a voice, a way of honoring the complex humanity of people's society too often rendered invisible. The day after graduation from Cooper Union, Marcus woke up in his tiny dorm room to the harsh reality that institutional support had ended. His scholarship, housing, and studio access, all gone. He had exactly 2 weeks to vacate, $437 in his bank account, and a portfolio of powerful but unsold work. "Welcome to the real world," his former classmate Aidan remarked as they cleared out their spaces. Aidan, whose father owned a successful advertising agency in Manhattan, already had a job lined up and a loft in Williamsburg. "You know, my dad could probably get you some commercial work if you're interested." Marcus considered it for a moment. Commercial art meant steady income, but it also meant compromising his vision, creating what clients wanted rather than what burned inside him. "Thanks, but I need to give my own work a real shot first." That night, he called his mother. "I'm thinking of staying in the city," he told her. "There's more opportunity here." Elaine's silence spoke volumes. She'd expected him to return to Harlem, to the bedroom that still held his childhood drawings. "It's expensive, Marcus. Richard and I can help a little, but—" "I know, Mom. I'll figure it out." Within a week, Marcus had secured 3 jobs: morning shifts at a coffee shop in the East Village, evening security guard work at a corporate office building, and weekend hours at an art supply store where the employee discount was more valuable than the meager paycheck. Between shifts, he painted in a corner of a shared apartment in Bushwick, where he split the $1,800 rent with 3 other struggling artists. His roommates, a photographer, a sculptor, and a performance artist, formed a makeshift family of creative strivers. They shared meals, contacts, and encouragement, but also the grinding anxiety of mounting student loans and dwindling bank accounts. Marcus watched as one by one, they compromised their artistic visions for financial stability. The photographer took a job shooting product photos for catalogs. The sculptor began creating decorative pieces for hotel lobbies. The performance artist went to law school. "Don't judge me," she said, packing her things. 3 years of misery for a lifetime of freedom to create what I want without worrying about rent. Marcus understood but couldn't bring himself to follow. His paintings, large-scale portraits of Harlem residents, subway workers, hospital orderlies, felt too urgent to abandon. They captured the dignity of invisible labor, the humanity of those society overlooked. Each canvas was a testament to his belief that art could force people to truly see one another. 2 years after graduation, Marcus's routine had hardened into exhausting predictability. Wake at 5 a.m. Coffee shop until 1 p.m. Paint until 7 p.m. Security guard shift until 3 a.m. Sleep for 2 hours. Repeat. Weekends at the art supply store. Any spare moment was spent applying for residencies, grants, and gallery submissions, all met with form letter rejections or, more often, silence. His sister Zora, now in her second year at Howard University studying pre-med, called regularly. "You sound tired," she observed during one late-night conversation. "I'm fine," Marcus lied, stirring ramen noodles on his hot plate. He'd been sending her $200 monthly from his meager earnings, knowing their parents were stretched thin covering her tuition. "You don't have to help with my expenses," Zora said, as if reading his mind. "I can take out more loans." "No way. You focus on becoming Dr. Jenkins. One of us needs to make the family proud." "Your work makes them proud, Marcus. Mom shows your Instagram to everyone at the hospital." Marcus laughed. "Great. My social media career is thriving, even if my actual career isn't." The truth was, his Instagram account had become his primary gallery, a digital space where he shared works in progress and finished pieces. It had a modest following of fellow artists and former classmates, but nothing that translated to sales or opportunities. Until Victoria Winters noticed. Victoria first appeared at the coffee shop on a Tuesday morning. Elegant, silver-haired, with the confident posture of old money, she ordered a simple black coffee and sat by the window, observing Marcus as he worked. When the morning rush subsided, she approached the counter. "You're the artist, aren't you? I recognize your hands from your Instagram videos." Startled, Marcus nodded. "You follow my work?" "I do now. I saw one of your pieces shared by a former student of mine. The portrait of the subway conductor, extraordinary empathy in those brushstrokes." She extended a business card. "Victoria Winters. I own a small gallery in Brooklyn Heights. Perhaps you'd show me your portfolio sometime." Marcus stared at the card, certain this was some elaborate prank. Victoria Winters' gallery was small but respected, known for launching several mid-career artists into national recognition. "I'd be honored," he managed. 2 days later, Marcus stood nervously in Victoria's gallery, watching as she examined his portfolio with methodical attention. The space was intimate but impeccably designed, currently featuring an exhibition of abstract landscapes that had received favorable reviews in several art publications. "Your technical skill is evident," Victoria said finally. "But what interests me more is your perspective. You see people, truly see them." She closed his portfolio. "I'd like to include 2 pieces in a group show next month. New voices, social commentary. The theme aligns perfectly with your work." Marcus struggled to maintain his composure. "That would be incredible." "Don't expect miracles," Victoria cautioned. "Group shows rarely make careers, but they can open doors. The right collector seeing your work could change everything." For the next 3 weeks, Marcus painted with renewed purpose, selecting his strongest pieces for the exhibition while creating new work that pushed his vision further. He cut back his security guard hours, surviving on even less sleep, fueled by the first legitimate opportunity of his career. The opening night of American Witnesses featured work from 6 emerging artists, each offering distinct perspectives on contemporary society. Marcus's 2 pieces, a large portrait of his grandmother titled Survivor, and a triptych of hospital workers called Night Shift, hung in a prime location near the entrance. He arrived early, heart pounding, dressed in the only suit he owned, purchased for his Cooper Union graduation and now slightly too tight across the shoulders. His mother and Richard had taken the train from Harlem for the occasion, Elaine beaming with pride as she circled the gallery repeatedly, eavesdropping on visitors' reactions to her son's work. "They're saying such wonderful things," she whispered, squeezing his arm. The evening passed in a blur of introductions, small talk, and the strange experience of hearing strangers dissect his intentions and techniques. By closing time, small red dots indicated that 3 pieces from the exhibition had sold, none of them his. Victoria found him as the crowd thinned. "Don't be discouraged. Your work made an impression. Several people took your information." Marcus nodded, trying to hide his disappointment. He'd allowed himself to hope for too much. 2 days later, Victoria called. "A collector wants to purchase Night Shift. Private sale, $3,000. Marcus nearly dropped the phone. $3,000 was more money than he'd seen at once since his graduation. That's amazing." "It's a start," Victoria corrected. "And there's more. The buyer wants to meet you. He's interested in commissioning additional work." The collector was Alan Chen, a 40-something tech entrepreneur who had recently sold his cybersecurity startup for an undisclosed but clearly substantial sum. He met Marcus at the gallery, dressed in expensive casual wear that probably cost more than Marcus's monthly rent. "Your triptych captured something I've been trying to articulate about essential workers," Chen explained, studying the painting. "The dignity, the exhaustion, the humanity. My mother was a nurse for 30 years. This speaks to her experience." They talked for nearly an hour, about art, representation, and Chen's growing collection of works by underrepresented artists. Before leaving, he commissioned 2 more pieces at $5,000 each. "I want to support voices like yours," Chen said. "The art world is too homogeneous, too insular. Your perspective matters." The commission allowed Marcus to reduce his work hours, focusing more energy on painting. He moved to a slightly better apartment with a small room dedicated to his art. For the first time since graduation, he could breathe, not comfortably, but enough to create without constant exhaustion. Over the next year, Victoria included his work in 2 more group shows. Sales remained modest but consistent enough to sustain his practice. Chen purchased 3 additional pieces and introduced Marcus to other collectors in his network. Slowly, his name began appearing in conversations about emerging talent. Then came the post that changed everything. Chen had recently renovated his company's headquarters in downtown Manhattan, designing the space to showcase his art collection. In the main conference room, he hung Marcus's largest work to date, a 6-foot canvas depicting a multi-generational black family gathered for Sunday dinner, their faces reflecting complex emotions of joy, worry, hope, and resilience. Titled Grace, it captured a moment of communion both ordinary and sacred. During a high-profile interview about his new venture capital fund, Chen was photographed in front of the painting. When asked about it, he spoke at length about Marcus's talent and vision. The interview went viral in tech circles, then spread to wider audiences when Chen posted it with additional images of Marcus's work and a passionate endorsement of his undiscovered genius. Marcus's Instagram followers jumped from a few hundred to over 20,000 in 3 days. His inbox flooded with inquiries from collectors, galleries, and art publications. Victoria's phone rang constantly with people asking about that artist from the Chen interview. Among those calls was one from Imani Davis, senior curator at Horizon Gallery, one of New York's most prestigious contemporary art spaces. "We're interested in discussing a solo exhibition," she said to Victoria. "Chen's post brought him to our attention, but the work speaks for itself. There's something extraordinary happening in those canvases." When Victoria relayed the message, Marcus sat down hard on his paint-splattered stool. Horizon Gallery represented established artists with international reputations. Their exhibitions were reviewed in major publications. Their openings attracted the kind of collectors who could transform careers overnight. "Is this real?" he asked, voice barely audible. "Very real," Victoria confirmed. And very deserved. This isn't just about Chen's endorsement. Your work was always going to find its audience, Marcus. Sometimes talent just needs a spotlight. That evening, Marcus called his mother with the news. For once, even Richard seemed genuinely impressed. Horizon Gallery, he repeated. That's the big leagues, son. Later, alone in his studio, Marcus stared at his current work in progress, a large canvas depicting the view from his childhood window in Harlem. The familiar landscape of fire escapes, water towers, and distant skyscrapers had been his first horizon. Now, a new horizon beckoned, one he had dreamed of but never truly believed he would reach. His phone buzzed with a text from Zora, "Always knew you'd make it. Never doubted for a second." Marcus smiled, running his paint-stained fingers over a section of canvas where the evening light caught the edge of a building, transforming ordinary brick into something luminous. Perhaps that had always been his gift, seeing the extraordinary within the ordinary, the beauty in overlooked places, the dignity in forgotten faces. The meeting with Imani Davis was scheduled for the following week. The exhibition, if all went well, would open in 6 months. After years of struggle, doors were finally opening. Marcus picked up his brush and returned to work, knowing that whatever came next, he had already succeeded in the most important way, remaining true to his vision when compromise would have been easier. The struggling artist was still struggling, but now with possibility rather than mere survival. Marcus couldn't sleep. The digital clock on his nightstand glowed 1:37 a.m., but his mind raced with thoughts of tomorrow's opening. After years of struggle, rejection, and near poverty, his first solo exhibition at Horizon Gallery would finally open to the public. 16 canvases that represented not just his artistic vision, but his journey from Harlem to the precipice of recognition. He sat up, switching on the lamp. The walls of his modest apartment were bare now, all his best work hung in the gallery, leaving only ghosts of frames marked by lighter patches on the paint. Tomorrow evening at 7 p.m., critics, collectors, and curators would judge his worth. The thought made his stomach clench. Just breathe, he whispered to himself, a mantra from his mother during childhood asthma attacks. But the anxiety persisted. What if no one came? Worse, what if they came and hated his work? What if this opportunity, this one miraculous chance, slipped through his fingers? Marcus grabbed his phone, scrolling through installation photos Imani had sent earlier. The lighting wasn't quite right on Homecoming, his largest piece. The shadows fell awkwardly across the central figure's face, diminishing the impact of her expression, the heart of the entire composition. Before he could reconsider, Marcus was pulling on jeans and a hoodie. He'd go to the gallery, just for a moment. Imani had given him a key for final preparations earlier that week. He'd adjust the lighting, calm his nerves, and finally get some sleep. The streets were nearly empty as he took the subway downtown. New York's pre-dawn quiet felt surreal, a city holding its breath. The gallery stood dark on a corner in Chelsea, its plate glass windows reflecting streetlights and passing taxis. Marcus unlocked the door, carefully disabling the security system with the code Imani had provided. Inside, the gallery was transformed by darkness, his paintings taking on new dimensions in the dim emergency lighting. He moved through the space reverently, adjusting a spotlight here, stepping back to consider the effect there. Perfect, he murmured, finally satisfied with Homecoming. The lighting now captured exactly what he'd intended, the complex emotion in the subject's eyes, the tension in her posture as she returned to a home both familiar and foreign. As he prepared to leave, a sharp beeping startled him. The security panel was flashing red. Somehow, the system had reactivated and was now registering his presence as an intrusion. Marcus rushed to the panel, frantically entering the code, but the beeping continued, growing more insistent. No, 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 he muttered, trying the code again. Nothing. The system was malfunctioning. He grabbed his phone to call Imani, but before he could dial, flashing lights illuminated the gallery interior. Police. 2 officers entered with weapons drawn. Hands where I can see them, one shouted. This is my exhibition, Marcus explained, raising his hands slowly. I'm the artist. I have permission to be here. Sure you do, the second officer replied, holstering his weapon and roughly spinning Marcus around. Cold metal handcuffs bit into his wrists. We got a call about a break-in. Gallery owners said no one should be here. Call Imani Davis, the curator. She gave me the key. Please, my exhibition opens tomorrow. The officers exchanged skeptical glances. We'll sort it out at the station. As they led him outside to the waiting police car, Marcus felt the weight of familiar eyes. A neighbor across the street watched from her window. A passing delivery driver slowed to stare. In their eyes, he wasn't an artist making final preparations for his breakthrough moment, he was just another black man in handcuffs. The irony wasn't lost on him. His exhibition, titled Visible/Invisible, explored exactly this, how black bodies were simultaneously hypervisible and completely unseen in American society. Now he was living his own artwork in the most painful way possible. In the back of the police car, Marcus closed his eyes, feeling the dream he'd worked toward for years potentially slipping away. His exhibition was hours from opening, and he was headed not toward celebration, but toward a holding cell. The holding cell at the 28th precinct smelled of industrial disinfectant, sweat, and despair. Marcus sat on a metal bench, his back against the cold concrete wall, wrists still throbbing from the tight handcuffs they'd finally removed during processing. Four other men shared the space, a drunk businessman sleeping it off in the corner, two young men arrested for a street fight, and an elderly homeless man who muttered continuously to himself. 3 hours had passed since his arrest. 3 hours of explaining to increasingly disinterested officers that he was the artist, not a thief. 3 hours of asking to call Imani, his gallery representative, anyone who could verify his story. 3 hours of being told to wait. First exhibition. The elderly man had stopped muttering and was now looking directly at Marcus. How did you know? Heard you telling the cops. Plus you got that look, like you lost something precious before you even had it. The man chuckled. I was a jazz musician, back in the day. Played with some big names. Night before my first real gig at the Village Vanguard, I got picked up for being in the wrong neighborhood after dark. Missed the whole show. Marcus felt a chill. What happened after that? Life happened. Other gigs came, but not like that one. That was my big break. He shrugged. Sometimes the world just says, not you, not now. The word settled heavily in Marcus's chest. His exhibition was scheduled to open in 14 hours. Collectors, critics, and gallery owners who might never give him a second chance would be there, or would have been there. Now, who knew? Jenkins. An officer appeared at the cell door. You're up for processing. Marcus followed him to a small room with a computer and fingerprinting equipment. The officer, younger than the others, at least made eye contact. Look, I've been trying to reach the gallery curator, Marcus said. My exhibition opens tonight. This is all a misunderstanding. Not my department, the officer replied, though his tone had softened slightly. Just need your fingerprints and photo for the system. Marcus placed his fingers on the scanner, one by one. The machine hummed, capturing his identity, reducing him to data points in a criminal database. Next came the mugshot, stand on the line, hold the placard, turn left, turn right. With each mechanical instruction, Marcus felt his identity as an artist, as a person with purpose and dignity, being stripped away. What happens now? He asked as the officer led him back toward the holding cell. Detective will interview you when one's available. It's a busy night. And if I can't reach anyone to verify my story? The officer hesitated. You'll be arraigned in the morning. Judge will set bail. Morning. Hours after his career-making opportunity would have begun. Marcus closed his eyes, fighting against the wave of despair threatening to drown him. Back in the cell, he sat with his head in his hands, trying to formulate a plan. If he could just reach Imani or Victoria, they could clear this up. But his phone had been confiscated, and his one permitted call had gone to his mother's voicemail. She worked night shifts and wouldn't check messages until morning. Around 6 a.m., a commotion erupted in the precinct. Raised voices, hurried footsteps, an atmosphere of sudden tension. The other detainees stirred, curious about the disruption to the holding area's grim routine. "Something's happening," the former jazz musician observed. "Maybe a big fish got caught." Minutes later, the cell door opened again. "Jenkins. Let's go." This officer was different, a detective, judging by his suit and the badge clipped to his belt. His expression was unreadable as he escorted Marcus not to an interview room but toward the front of the precinct. "What's going on?" Marcus asked. "Someone's here for you." The detective's tone was clipped, almost resentful. They entered the precinct lobby, where a cluster of officers had gathered, their body language a mixture of deference and wariness. At the center of their attention stood a man who seemed to occupy space differently than those around him, as if the room had been designed with him in mind. Tall, with salt and pepper hair cut precisely, he wore a charcoal suit that even Marcus, with his limited knowledge of men's fashion, could tell cost thousands. His back was to Marcus as he spoke quietly to what appeared to be the precinct captain, but something about his posture, the straight spine, the slight tilt of the head, triggered a strange sense of familiarity. The captain noticed Marcus and gestured in his direction. The man in the expensive suit turned, and for a moment, Marcus felt the world tilt sideways. It was like looking into a mirror that showed a future version of himself, the same cheekbones, the same set of the jaw, the same intense eyes, though this man's were a shade lighter. "Marcus." The man's deep voice carried across the room, silencing all other conversation. "I'm Desmond Cole." The surname wasn't lost on Marcus. Cole. His own last name, or what should have been his last name, had his mother not given him her maiden name, Jenkins, instead. "I don't understand," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm your father." 3 words that shattered 28 years of believing he had been abandoned, unwanted. 3 words that made no sense coming from a man who exuded wealth and power from every pore. Desmond stepped forward, his eyes taking in Marcus's disheveled appearance, the blood on his wrists, the bruise forming on his cheekbone where it had been pressed into the pavement. Something dangerous flashed in the older man's eyes. "We have much to discuss, but perhaps not here." He gestured toward the door where a sleek black Bentley waited at the curb. Then he turned to the captain, his voice dropping to a glacial tone. "And I will be discussing the treatment of my son with your superiors. Extensively." The captain paled visibly. Marcus stood frozen, his mind racing. The father his mother had described as a deadbeat who disappeared before he could walk was standing before him, not as the failure he'd imagined, but as someone powerful enough to walk into a police precinct and have charges dropped with a word. "How did you even know I was here?" Marcus finally asked, his voice hoarse from hours of unanswered pleas. "Facial recognition software in the precinct's booking system. I've had algorithms searching for you for years." Desmond's expression softened slightly. "I never stopped looking for you, Marcus." An officer appeared with Marcus's belongings in a plastic bag, his phone, wallet, keys, and the gallery access card. Desmond took them, handing them to Marcus with a gentleness that seemed at odds with his commanding presence. "Your exhibition opens tonight, I believe. We should get you home so you can prepare." The casual mention of his exhibition, knowledge Desmond shouldn't have possessed, jolted Marcus from his shock. "You know about that? I make it my business to know everything about you." Desmond guided him toward the door, a light touch on his elbow. "We have much to discuss." Outside, the Bentley gleamed in the early morning light. A uniformed driver opened the rear door, revealing an interior of buttery leather and polished wood. Marcus hesitated, suddenly aware of his rumpled clothes, the dried blood on his wrists, the stale smell of the holding cell clinging to him. "I can't go home like this," he said. "My mother will be worried sick." "I've taken the liberty of contacting Elaine," Desmond replied, the name of Marcus's mother rolling off his tongue with practiced familiarity. "She knows you're safe." The casual mention of his mother sent another shock through Marcus's system. This stranger, this father, had spoken to Elaine. What had she said? What explanation had she given for the lifetime of silence? Marcus slid into the Bentley, the luxury enveloping him like another world. Desmond joined him, and the door closed with a soft, expensive thunk. The interior smelled of leather and some subtle cologne, sandalwood, perhaps. The partition between them and the driver was closed, creating an intimate space that suddenly felt too small for the questions expanding in Marcus's chest. "I don't understand any of this," Marcus said as the car pulled smoothly into morning traffic. "My mother told me you abandoned us before I could walk. That you wanted nothing to do with me." Desmond's jaw tightened. "That's not exactly what happened." "Then what did happen?" Marcus pulled his hands away, anger suddenly flaring. "Where have you been for 28 years while I grew up thinking I wasn't worth staying for?" "Searching for you," Desmond replied, his voice tight with emotion. "Against your mother's explicit wishes." The car stopped at a red light, and for a moment, the two men sat in silence, separated by decades of absence yet connected by unmistakable resemblance. The same strong jawline. The same intense eyes. The same artistic hands, though Desmond's were manicured and adorned with a single gold signet ring while Marcus's were stained with paint and now marked with the wounds of injustice. "I met your mother in 1994, Desmond finally said as the car moved forward again. "I was already successful, my first tech company had just been acquired for a substantial sum. I was in Harlem for a community investment initiative my foundation was launching." Marcus listened, trying to reconcile this narrative with the story he'd grown up with, the tale of a charming but irresponsible man who disappeared when responsibility became real. "Elaine was working at a community center where we were setting up a computer lab. She was luminous. Brilliant, passionate about her community, unimpressed by my wealth." A small smile touched Desmond's lips. "We fell in love quickly. Too quickly, perhaps." "So what went wrong?" Marcus asked, unable to keep the edge from his voice. "My family," Desmond said simply. "The Coles have been in banking and real estate for generations. Old money, old prejudices. When I told them about Elaine, about our child on the way, they gave me an ultimatum, end the relationship or be disinherited. And you chose money," Marcus concluded, the familiar pain of abandonment rising again. "No." Desmond's voice was sharp. "I chose you both. I told my family they could keep their money and their bigotry. I proposed to Elaine that night. This didn't align with anything Marcus had been told." "Then why?" "She refused," Desmond continued. "Said she wouldn't be responsible for coming between me and my family. That she could raise our child on her own. I tried to convince her otherwise, but Elaine has always been stubborn." The car turned onto a tree-lined street in the Upper East Side, slowing as it approached a limestone townhouse. "I respected her decision not to marry me, but I never agreed to stay away from my child. We reached a compromise. I would provide financial support through a trust, and once you were old enough to understand, we would tell you the truth together." Desmond's hands tightened into fists. "But when you were nearly 2, Elaine disappeared. Moved without notice, changed her number. Used her maiden name for you. It took my investigators years to locate you, and by then, she had married Richard Taylor and made it clear that any attempt to contact you would result in a legal battle that would only hurt you." Marcus's head was spinning. This version of events contradicted everything he'd believed about his origins. "Why would she lie to me? Tell me you abandoned us." "Perhaps it was easier than the truth," Desmond said quietly. "That she chose to keep us apart." The car stopped in front of the townhouse. Through the window, Marcus could see a discreet security team, the kind wealthy people employed without drawing attention to themselves. I've respected her wishes all these years, watching you from a distance, making sure the trust was always funded, following your career through private investigators. Desmond turned to face Marcus fully. But I never stopped looking for a way to be in your life. When my security team alerted me that your face had appeared in a police database this morning, I knew I couldn't stay away any longer. The trust, Marcus repeated, a new understanding dawning. My art school scholarship. The grant that covered my supplies. The anonymous donation to Cooper Union the year I attended. That was all you? Desmond nodded. I couldn't be there in person, but I could make sure you had opportunities. Marcus felt dizzy with revelations. The narrative of his life, struggling artist from Harlem, fighting against all odds, suddenly seemed constructed rather than organic. How much of his journey had been quietly engineered by the man sitting beside him? Your exhibition tonight, Desmond said, changing the subject. Horizon Gallery is a significant opportunity. Imani Davis has an excellent eye. You know Imani? Not personally. But I know her reputation. And I know the gallery owner, Jonathan Horizon. We serve on several boards together. A terrible thought struck Marcus. Did you arrange the exhibition? Use your connections to. No, Desmond interrupted firmly. Your talent earned that opportunity. I've been careful never to interfere directly with your career. That would dishonor your work and your mother's wishes. The driver opened Marcus's door, letting in the sounds of morning traffic and birdsong from the nearby park. This is my home, Desmond said. I'd like you to come inside. Clean up, rest before your opening tonight. We have much more to discuss, but it can wait until you're ready. Marcus hesitated at the threshold of this new reality. Behind him lay 28 years of believing one story about his origins. Ahead lay an unknown future and a truth he wasn't sure he was ready to hear. I need to call my mother, he said finally. Desmond nodded. Of course. You'll find everything you need inside. Take all the time you require. As Marcus stepped out of the car, the morning sun illuminated the elegant facade of the townhouse, a world away from the Harlem apartment where he'd grown up, the cramped Bushwick space where he'd created his art, the holding cell where he'd spent the night. Yet the man who owned this place shared his blood, his features, perhaps even his talent. The precinct faded into the distance as they approached the imposing front door. In 12 hours, Marcus's exhibition would open, a collection of paintings that told the story of who he thought he was. But now, standing beside the father he never knew existed, his body still aching from the brutal arrest, Marcus wondered what story he would tell tomorrow, and all the tomorrows after that. Desmond's townhouse was a study in understated wealth, high ceilings, original moldings, and walls adorned with museum-quality art. But what stopped Marcus in his tracks wasn't the Basquiat in the foyer or the Romari Bearden in the living room. It was a small, framed sketch hanging in an alcove near the staircase, unmistakably his own work. That's mine, he said, approaching it slowly. A study I did during my second year at Cooper Union. Desmond nodded. Your professor sold it at a student exhibition. I had a representative attend every show. The sketch, a quick study of an elderly man on a park bench, was nothing special in Marcus's estimation. A practice piece, not something he'd consider part of his serious portfolio. Yet here it hung, carefully framed and positioned in a place of honor. I have others, Desmond said quietly. Upstairs, in my private study. Marcus turned to face him, suddenly overwhelmed. I need to understand. All of it. Desmond gestured toward a sunlit sitting room. Please. They sat across from each other, two men connected by blood yet strangers in every way that mattered. A housekeeper appeared silently with coffee, then disappeared just as quietly. I met your mother when she was 22, Desmond began, his voice steady but tinged with something like reverence. I was 34, already successful in tech and finance. My family's money had opened doors, but I'd built something of my own by then. He described their meeting at the Harlem Community Center, Elaine challenging his assumptions about what the neighborhood needed, her fierce intelligence and unwillingness to be charmed by his wealth or connections. We were from different worlds, but she made me see mine more clearly. Desmond's gaze drifted to the window. When she told me she was pregnant, I was overjoyed. I wanted to marry her immediately. But she refused, Marcus said, recalling their earlier conversation. Not at first. Desmond's expression darkened. She agreed initially. We were planning a small ceremony when my parents intervened. They'd hired investigators, discovered her background, her father's incarceration, her mother's work as a domestic, the public housing where she'd grown up. Marcus felt a surge of protective anger. None of that matters. It shouldn't have, Desmond agreed. But to the Cole family, it did. They threatened not just to disinherit me, but to use their connections to destroy any business I built, to ensure I'd never succeed independently. So you chose your legacy over us, Marcus said, the familiar narrative reasserting itself. No. Desmond's voice was firm. I chose you both over them. I told them I was marrying Elaine, that we were having a child, and that they could either accept my family or lose their son. He described the weeks that followed, his parents' escalating threats, the pressure they applied through mutual connections, the whisper campaign they began in their social circles. Then one night, Elaine ended it. Said she wouldn't let me sacrifice everything I'd built. That she couldn't bear the responsibility of coming between me and my family. Desmond's composure cracked slightly. I begged her to reconsider. Promised I didn't care about the money or the connections. But she was adamant. So you just gave up? Marcus couldn't keep the accusation from his voice. Never. Desmond leaned forward. We reached a compromise. I would establish a trust for your education and future. We would co-parent, though not as a couple. And when you were old enough to understand, we would explain the situation together. He rose, crossing to a built-in bookcase, and removed a leather portfolio. From it, he extracted a stack of documents, legal papers, photographs, letters. For the first year, it worked. I saw you weekly. I have pictures. He passed over several photographs of an infant Marcus being held by a younger Desmond, both smiling at the camera. But as you approached your second birthday, something changed. Elaine became distant, cancelled visits. Then one day, I arrived at your apartment to find you both gone. The documents he showed next were private investigator reports, legal correspondence, bank records showing regular deposits to an account in Marcus's name, deposits that began the month of his birth and continued to the present day. She never used the money, Desmond said. Not until your art school applications. Then suddenly, the account was accessed for application fees, supplies, housing deposits. Marcus stared at the bank statements, the steady accumulation of funds he'd never known existed. All those scholarships I thought I earned. You did earn them, Desmond insisted. The trust merely ensured you could accept them without financial worry. Your talent is entirely your own. The morning passed in a blur of revelations. Desmond showed him surveillance photos taken over the years, Marcus at school performances, art exhibitions, even walking to his various jobs. A life documented from afar by a father who'd never stopped watching. Why didn't you just approach me directly? Once I was an adult. I respected the legal agreement your mother's attorneys established. Any contact before your 30th birthday would result in litigation that would expose you to public scrutiny. Desmond's expression hardened. Until this morning, when I received an alert that you'd been arrested. Some agreements matter less than ensuring my son's safety. Marcus checked his phone, dozens of missed calls and texts from Imani, Victoria, his roommates. The exhibition was scheduled to open in just hours. I need to get to the gallery, he said, suddenly remembering the world that had existed before this morning's revelations. Of course. Desmond stood. My driver can take you wherever you need to go. In the upstairs guest bathroom, Marcus showered away the holding cell's grime, his mind racing. The hot water stung the abrasions on his wrists, a physical reminder of the night's humiliation. When he emerged, he found fresh clothes laid out, his exact size, simple but expensive pieces that somehow matched his usual aesthetic while upgrading it significantly. Downstairs, Desmond waited by the door. "I took the liberty of calling Imani Davis. The situation has been explained, and the gallery is ready for you." "You spoke to Imani?" Marcus felt a flash of unease at how easily Desmond inserted himself into his life. "Only to ensure your professional obligations weren't compromised by this morning's incident." Desmond hesitated. "I'd like to attend the opening tonight, if you're comfortable with that." "As a guest, not as my father," Marcus finished. The word felt strange in his mouth. "I need time to process all this." Of course. If Desmond was disappointed, he hid it well. "The car is waiting." The ride to Horizon Gallery passed in silence. When they arrived, Imani was waiting, her usual composed demeanor showing cracks of concern. "Marcus. Thank God." She embraced him briefly. "When the police called, I was terrified. Then Mr. Cole's office reached out." She glanced at the Bentley now pulling away from the curb. "I had no idea you were connected to the Coles." "Neither did I," Marcus said quietly. "Until this morning." Inside, the gallery was transformed. His paintings, the work of years, hung perfectly lit against pristine walls. Exhibition catalogs were stacked neatly on a minimalist desk. Champagne flutes waited to be filled. In just hours, this space would determine the trajectory of his career. "Everything's ready," Imani assured him. "The guest list is confirmed. Several major collectors and critics have RSVP'd. This is going to be significant, Marcus." He nodded, moving through the space, reconnecting with his work after the surreal morning. These paintings, studies of identity, belonging, visibility, now seemed prophetic. He'd been exploring questions of who he was while unaware of half his own story. The opening exceeded every expectation. By 8 o'clock, the gallery was packed. Critics clustered before his larger works, deep in analysis. Collectors spoke in hushed tones with Imani. Red dots appeared beside painting after painting, indicating sales. Marcus moved through the crowd in a daze, accepting congratulations, answering questions about his technique and inspiration. Victoria arrived with Alan Chen, both beaming with pride at their protégé's success. "You've arrived," Victoria whispered, squeezing his arm. "This changes everything." From across the room, Marcus spotted Desmond, standing quietly near the entrance, observing but not approaching. Their eyes met briefly, and Desmond nodded once, a gesture of respect rather than familiarity. Near midnight, as the last guests departed, Imani approached with a glass of champagne and a wide smile. 12 paintings sold. The Times critic is writing a feature. The Whitney curator wants to meet next week. She clinked her glass against his. "You're not emerging anymore, Marcus. You've emerged." The validation should have felt triumphant. Instead, it felt hollow against the weight of the day's revelations. As Imani continued detailing the evening's successes, Marcus's phone vibrated in his pocket. His mother's name appeared on the screen. "I need to take this," he said, stepping into the gallery's back office for privacy. "Marcus." His mother's voice was thick with emotion. "Are you all right? I got your message about the arrest." Then Desmond called in. "Is it true?" Marcus interrupted. "Everything he told me about the past." The silence that followed contained 28 years of carefully constructed narrative crumbling. "Not everything is as black and white as he probably presented it," Elaine finally said. "But yes, the basic facts are true. He didn't abandon us. I made the decision to raise you alone." "Why?" The single word carried the weight of a lifetime's questioning. "I was trying to protect you." Her voice cracked. "His family was powerful, vindictive. They made it clear they would never accept a grandchild of mixed race from Harlem. I couldn't bear the thought of you growing up feeling their rejection, being caught between two worlds. So you denied me half of who I am. Marcus couldn't keep the hurt from his voice. Let me believe I wasn't wanted. I wanted you to be proud of where you came from, not ashamed of who wouldn't accept you. Elaine's voice strengthened with conviction. Maybe it was wrong, but I did what I thought would hurt you least. The trust fund, the money, you never told me. I was proud too, she admitted. Didn't want to depend on his money. But when art school came, when I saw how talented you were, how much you deserved that opportunity, I swallowed my pride. Marcus leaned against the desk, suddenly exhausted. I don't know how to feel about any of this. You don't have to decide tonight, his mother said gently. Just know that everything I did was because I love you. Even the mistakes. After they hung up, Marcus remained in the office, staring at the blank wall. Outside, his career breakthrough waited to be celebrated. His newly discovered father waited to be acknowledged. His mother waited to be forgiven, or not. Between these competing truths, Marcus found himself exactly where his art had always positioned him, at the intersection of visibility and invisibility, belonging and exclusion, past and future. The irony wasn't lost on him that on the night his professional identity was finally being recognized, his personal identity had never felt more uncertain. 1 year after the night that changed everything, Marcus stood in the center of the Museum of Modern Art, surrounded by his newest collection, Reconciliation, a series exploring the complexity of identity and truth. The centerpiece was a triptych, the first panel showing handcuffs and prison bars, the second depicting two men with the same features separated by a translucent veil, and the third revealing three figures standing together in golden light. The exhibition had opened to critical acclaim, but more meaningful was the small group gathered for the private viewing, his mother Elaine, her husband Richard, his sister Zora, and Desmond. A family configuration he couldn't have imagined a year earlier. In the months following his revelation, Marcus had channeled his confusion and anger into his work while slowly building relationships with both parents. The process hadn't been easy, there had been difficult conversations, tears, and moments when reconciliation seemed impossible. But gradually, truth had created space for understanding. Your work keeps evolving, Desmond said, joining him before the triptych. This is your most powerful yet. I had more to say, Marcus replied simply. They stood in comfortable silence, father and son, their reflections mirrored in the protective glass, two profiles with the same strong jawline, the same thoughtful eyes. Do you regret finding me? Marcus asked, the question he'd been afraid to voice. Not for a second, Desmond answered without hesitation. Even with all the complications, the truth is always better than comfortable fiction. Marcus nodded, watching as his mother approached from across the gallery, her smile tentative but genuine as she took her place beside them. Three people connected by choice now, not just by circumstance or blood. I think I finally understand what my work has always been trying to say, Marcus said quietly. That identity isn't fixed, it's a conversation between who we think we are, who others see, and who we might become. This story raises important questions about family, identity, and the secrets we keep. What would you do if you discovered a parent had been searching for you your entire life? Would you embrace them or feel betrayed by the years lost? Let me know your thoughts, and if you found this story moving, please like, share, and subscribe to Courage Core Stories for more powerful true stories that will make you think.